Hey guys, how you doing? Luna here with a new video for the channel, and today we have a new episode on the ranked series. This is basically a series where I take your favorite artists and rank their discography, their albums from worst to best. This time we're talking about one of the greatest, one of the most amazing bands in the history of rock music and music in general, Led Zeppelin. As you may or may not know, if you don't, that means that probably your sister is your mother. The Led Zeppelin has one of the greatest catalogs in the history of music. Like, we're talking about there's not a single bad album in their discography. Obviously there's some better than others. If not, this video would have no point, and that's what I'm here to do. Remember, then this is only my personal opinion. So if you have your own, go ahead, leave it down below in the comments. When we're talking about a band like Led Zeppelin, there's no list that can please everybody. All of the albums are amazing, all of them are enjoyable, so I'm pretty sure that everyone has an opinion on their own. So go ahead, leave yours down below and I'll make sure to check it out. Also, shout out to my boy here. You know how nice it is to receive comments like this. Honestly, if you want to make me happy or anyone you love happy, do shit like this, man. This was lovely. Thank you for your comment. Appreciate you. Although you didn't like the video, fam. You didn't like the video, but thank you for the nice comment. Let's go on with the list. We have 8 albums to cover. That means that we're not counting Coda or, Celebration Day in 2012. We're starting off at Led Zeppelin 1 and we're letting it off at In Through the Outdoor. Speaking of the devil, here we are. In Through the Outdoor for me is the worst Led Zeppelin album. It's kind of hard to, make this list, especially as a fan, because honestly, it feels wrong to put an album like this at number 8. It almost feels like I'm telling everyone that it's like the most horrible album ever, but it's not really. It's not. This is not a bad album, and actually, if you enjoy this type of music, this is quite a good listen. The reason why it's at number 8 is that you'll see that we're talking about Led Zeppelin, so the level of quality, it's a bit higher up. If you want to call an album, a Led Zeppelin album, good, you have to do better than this. Around this time, the band was basically dissolved. They had a lot of issues with drug, especially Robert Plant and John Bonham, the drummer. And Robert Plant was even involved in a car accident. So because of that, many of the performances here don't seem as passionate and as well, polished as in other albums, previous albums, even, in the one prior to this one, which was Presence. And when you're onto Led Zeppelin, you kind of know that what makes the band so great is the performances. The songwriting is also a factor, but actually the songwriting here isn't all that great either. Actually, the use of synths and the pretty obvious commercially successful approach they had for this album, it's clearly kind of shifting away from the band's sound a little bit too much. Actually, I'm pretty sure that the only great tracks in this album are just Full on the Rain, which is a really good track, one of the best from Led Zeppelin, and Hot Dog, which is not that much of a great track. It's just a little nice rock and roller. The rest of the songs go from okay to good, and that's just pretty much it. And if this is a Led Zeppelin album, you need to do way better. I believe that this album is a little bit underrated, if you ask me. I think that people give this album too much shit, and actually I know many Led Zeppelin fans that haven't even heard this album, don't even give them a try, because they kind of, it's kind of like a popular rumor that these albums are just not it, and it's not Led Zeppelin anymore. For many people, Led Zeppelin ended with Physical Graffiti, and I can kind of see why. It was kind of like the last great, awesome, legendary album the band put out, but this is still a really good listen. Actually, the opening track on this song, Achilles' Last Stand, is a almost 10-minute epic that goes on. The riff of this song is fast. Robert Plant's performance is on point. The drumming on this track is fucking excellent. This track is amazing. And actually, the track is so good that I think that you can quote the kind of, the fact that this album is like the black sheep of Led Zeppelin's discography to only that song, because it's so good and it's so much better than the rest of the album. Then everything after that, like Royal Orleans and For Your Life, sounds so less amazing. The only track that I think that it's similar to Keely's Last Stand in terms of quality in this album is T for One. The closing track of this album, which again doesn't help the overall listen as much. It definitely closes the album really well. The album starts really well, but everything in between seems like too underwhelming. And it's not precisely because of anything. The production in here is amazing. The performances are still great, although Robert Plant's performance in Candy Store Rock isn't all that great, but still, you have some good production here as well. The only thing that doesn't go as hard as the other albums is the songwriting, and obviously that's just key for an album to be good. The songs here are not as timeless, as legendary, and as amazing as many of the other songs the band put out before this album. So definitely this album can feel a little bit too underwhelming, especially if you jump into the discography, from the first album to the last. You just listen to Physical Graffiti, such an amazing album, and you go to this one, it's it's obviously a flop, but it's still, it's still a really good album. I'm not willing to say that this is a great album, but that's the thing with Led Zeppelin. We're only at spot number 7. This is the second to worst song in album in Led Zeppelin's discography, and we still have a pretty decent, solid album. So go ahead, give this one a try. I know that many people haven't because they think that this album is just shit. It isn't. It's a really good listen. You just have to jump in without being a prejudiced son of a bitch. This is where, the painful part starts with Led Zeppelin, because Led Zeppelin 1 has to be one of the greatest and most influential rock albums of all time, and I have to put it at number 6. Well, Led Zeppelin 2, 3, and 4 were kind of like them developing this sound, perfecting this sound, adding new things into that sound. This was like the pure Led Zeppelin, at their earliest, most raw. So why am I putting it at number 6? Well, the reason is pretty simple, and it's because the production in this album is pretty questionable, as well as some decision in terms of songwriting. For example, you have totally improvised and not as pleasant moments. For example, the battle or the face-off of Robert Plant and Jimmy Page by the end of the track, You Shook Me. That's not pleasant. I don't think it sounds good. I think it kind of ruins the whole groove the track had built up to that point, because it's a really long track. Which is another thing. I believe that many of the songs here are way too long for what they offer. They're good tunes, but we're talking about rock songs, and they're not like progressive rock, or they don't change at any given moment. They're just like the same song for 7, 8, 9, 10 minutes, and that's not really something that I can put up with every time. Definitely when I'm in the mood, then go ahead. As I said, this is a great album. This is an awesome album. Actually, in my most recent video of great albums, which is a series I have on this channel, if you want to check that out, I have this album included as as a great album, so that can tell you this album is pretty good. But I'm just kind of justifying the reasons why I'm putting it below the others, and it's the fact that the production is really rough. I believe many of the tracks here overstay their welcome. I don't think that it necessarily needed to be that long, but the best things of this album totally kill off the bad things. For example, the dramatic, kind of apocalyptic riff on the track Dazed and Confused, and Communication Breakdown being one of the best rock songs ever, period. You have this seemingly acoustic track, I Can Quit You Baby, that then turns into probably the heaviest track on this album, and that's saying some shit. And then, of course, the track You Shook Me, then even if I don't like that, and the ending, I believe the track itself is pretty good, which kind of leads me to the other thing that I don't, the other reason why I'm putting this album so low, is the fact that this album leans a bit too heavily on its influences. I do believe that, the blues, the blues scene influence in this album is way too apparent, to the point where it's almost a ripoff, especially in tracks like You Shook Me. They were still trying to figure that out, and that's totally fine. But it's definitely a reason for me to put this album a bit lower. So yeah. This album is probably the most underrated album in Led Zeppelin's discography. Led Zeppelin 3, in my opinion, was a huge improvement over Led Zeppelin 1 and 2 in terms of production. A lot of people may be confused, as I was, because jumping into this album, this was supposed to be the acoustic album, or that's what people called this thing. And then as soon as you start the album, Immigrant Song comes into play, and goddamn, the riff and the drums and everything about that track, the Robert Plant band singing. Everything is so claustrophobic and fast and fucking heavy. How is this acoustic? I don't understand. We're talking about an album that has Since I've Been Loving You, one of the hardest blues rock tracks ever, bro. It's amazing. The track, it's wonderful, one of my favorites. You know, the way that the guitar plays and with the drums so well. The bass in this, in this whole album sounds so excellent. John Paul Jones did a wonderful job in this album. Props to him. You could still feel those influences that kind of pushed through the first two Led Zeppelin albums, but now they were more Led Zeppelin than ever. But overall, I think that, the fact that this album is called the acoustic album is more due to the fact of, the huge, massive, and so evident improvement on production. In previous Led Zeppelin albums, everything was all over the place. At any given moment, even if it wasn't, such a heavy track, it sounded all over your ears. It was loud as fuck. In this album, it sounds way more controlled and everything sounds, better, like it's in place without taking away the rawness of the band. This whole album is such an experience, man. I definitely recommend you to check this out. Shut the fuck up if you think this album is, overrated or you don't think it's that great. It's definitely at the same level of the other, self-titled Led Zeppelin releases. So yeah, go ahead, give it a try. Putting Led Zeppelin 2 at number 4 may seem like an insult to the band. I do know the importance of this album. I do know how much of an improvement this album was in regards to the previous one, but hear me out. I still think, and actually if I would have this my way, I would have put Led Zeppelin 3 over this one, but because I'm also considering like the importance of the album and overall like the amount of hits, this albums have, I have to put this one above it. But production in this album is still a bit rough, actually. I'll dare to say that even more rough than in the previous album, Led Zeppelin 1. But, with tracks like Whole Lotta Love, which is arguably one of the best Led Zeppelin songs, with tracks like Heartbreaker, The Lemon Song, What Is and What Should Never Be, the beautiful folky tune Ramble On, there are many beautiful and also, raw and accelerating moments in this album. And this is basically, this album feels like a compilation because of how well every single one of the songs stand up for themselves. You have Moby Dick, which I think is probably one of the greatest and most interesting solos ever in rock music, at least in the 70s. It kind of shows how much of a fucking genius John Bonham was. Jimmy Page comes up with one of his best riffs in tracks like Whole Lotta Love and Heartbreaker. You also have that amazing groovy track Living Lovin' Made. Great. This album is awesome. It's pretty much just a set of amazing songs. There's nothing else to say about it. Go ahead and listen to this thing. It's amazing. Let's go on with number 3. Hey, listen, I know that I'm gonna get shit for this. I know that this album, it's quite polarizing to put it so high on the list, but I just love this record. I think it's one of the best and most cohesive albums the band ever made, which is the reason why I love it so much. For example, in the opening track, the song remains the same. Jimmy Page, John Bonham, and John Paul Jones go ahead and pave the way with a fast, accelerating track that then goes slow and more quiet for Robert Plant to go in and carry the track. Such an amazing song. And then you have the Rain song. What a beautiful track, the strings, the drums, the bass line, the guitar, everything about this track kind of feels like a teaser for the next track, which is Over the Hills and Far Away. One of my favorite, and actually, I'm gonna say this, my favorite Led Zeppelin tune. So amazing the way it starts with that guitar riff at the beginning, that acoustic guitar riff, which was something that Jimmy Page used to do a lot. So beautiful. Then Robert Plant starts singing in this really melodic tune, and then it goes out to the rock and roll. Fucking amazing. You also have the Ocean song, Dancing Days, which is a good track too. No Quarter, which is arguably one of the best vocal performances that Robert Plant ever pulled off. And although I'm willing to admit that maybe that reggae thing that they try to do on the album with that track that I don't even know how to pronounce. Hey, look, would you really argue that only that track and the fact that it's not a bad track, it's just kind of underwhelming, being side to side with such an amazing track list. But would you really consider that kind of takes away all of the amazing things this album does? I don't think so. Actually, I'm willing to just enjoy the track. It's kind of like a chill moment, like calm down moment in the middle of the album. That's how I take it. And this album is one of my favorite albums ever. No matter if we're talking about rock music, the 70s, or any other decade, this is a goated album in my opinion. I love it. Physical Graffiti is at number 2, but you know what? It could have been number 1. Actually, depending on my mood and the type of day I had, it's number 1. The number 2 and number 1 spot can go either way. We're talking about some of the greatest and most quintessential rock albums that any band has put out. These albums are the reason why everyone thinks so highly and speaks so well of Led Zeppelin every time they get into a debate. Physical Graffiti is an actual juggernaut. We're talking about, I believe it's 88 minutes of music and rock music for 88 minutes. That's quite a lot. If you listen to music and you have heard a fair amount of albums, you know that it's not easy for an artist, a rock artist, to release an 88-minute filled with heavy rock tunes and then, for it to stay enjoyable. But it does so well. And not only is this 88 minutes, but it's also, it has tracks so long. In My Time of Dying is 11 minutes long. And you know what? I wish that it was longer. I wish that it was 15 minutes long, because that track is amazing. The chemistry of the whole band in this album is insane. No one stands out. It's always like a group effort, and it sounds so well. The track Kashmir is probably one of the greatest rock songs of all time, one of the most dramatic, apocalyptic songs that any band has released, and it doesn't even need to go that hard. The track is hard, but considering that we're in a music industry that has metal music, dark wave music, fucking death metal music, you have Led Zeppelin releasing a song like this that can literally make your skin feel like, rock, without actually going as hard as this other genres. We're talking about the best vocal performances by Robert Plant ever, no matter the album we're talking about. And if you know about Robert Plant and the things he can do with his voice, you know that I'm saying some shit. You also have some relaxing moments on this album. Not everything is fucking epic and apocalyptic and so heavy and awesome. You have Down by the Seaside if you want to relax a little bit, you know what I'm saying? With those reverbed riffs that Jimmy Page uses in this song are amazing. It's just so beautiful and so pretty. Just like Black Country Woman, which is another beautiful, relaxing song on this album. So you basically have everything here. You have a lot of synths in this album as well that kind of hinted to what the band wanted to do in albums like In Through the Outdoor and Presence, but in here they used it really well. You also have Houses of the Holy, which is also a highlight on this album. I can kind of name you every single song in here, and the reason why I do believe that even though number 1 has like the 5-star track list, I do like this album just as much, only because of how well it connects every single one of its sounds. You never feel off place in this album. You never feel an awkward moment. Everything was performed. Every single sound in here. The production is also amazing. Most of the tunes here, just seem to yell at you that you're listening to the most accomplished version of Led Zeppelin, the most mature one, and the most legendary one. So go ahead, give this album a try. This is one of the best rock and roll, rock albums, actually. One of the best albums, actually, of all time. So give it a try. It's kind of obvious. I don't like to be a basic bitch, that I often try to be different from other people because I'm that much of an idiot. But I just had to put this album here. Led Zeppelin 4 is basically like the most perfect and most polished rock album of all time. Every single track in here, it's legendary. Let's go through the track list for a moment. You have the opener, Black Dog, which shows the amount of chemistry Jimmy Page and Robert Plant had. Also John Bonham doing an amazing job on this track. Then you have Rock and Roll, which is a really good, banging rock and roll tune, a great track. Also great vocal performance by Robert Plant, as always, but in here it's especially good. And then what do you got? You got Battle of Evermore, then you have Stairway to Heaven, bro. Stairway to Heaven, even a track that's so overplayed as Stairway to Heaven, and it's still considered to be one of the greatest tracks of all time. You know that it's some shit. But if you want more, then fine, I'll give you more, bro. You have Going to California, When the Levee Breaks, Four Sticks, an all-star track list. This is what it is. You know, it feels like the band basically went ahead, recorded their best songs ever, like without an exception, and put them all into the album. The band doesn't really make a single effort to kind of joint these tracks together. It's obvious that some of these tracks were written at different points of their career, but goddamn, you don't really need to connect. When the tracks are so good, you don't really need to connect the tracks that well. You know, you just have to put them there and let them do their job. You have some of the best, if not the best, drumming from John Bonham in this album, as well as some of the best bass lines and bass work here with John Paul Jones. The whole band was at its prime. You know, it sounds so good. Everything in this album, I wouldn't change a thing. I wouldn't add a single second to any of the songs, nor I would take any. Listen to this album, because this album is everything you need to know, okay? This is the ABC of rock. This is the most legendary rock album. If there was a dictionary that basically put images with every single word they describe, when they're going to describe rock music, you have to put this album there, because this is like the greatest example of rock, ever released. So every time I go to bed, every time that I try, putting a rock album, before you do that, you have to give a little prayer to the golden god and the god of refs, and the thunder of the gods, the hammer of the gods, I believe it was John Bonham's nickname, and also to John Paul Jones for creating this, because this is this. I know I'm fangirling a little bit over this album, but it's just too good, man. Just too good. Listen to this album. This is definitely their best. This was their most important musical statement. This was everything for Led Zeppelin. So even if we're talking about the greatest band ever, and every album that I've talked about in this video is either good or fucking legendary, this is the peak. This is as good as it gets with the band. So go ahead, listen to this if you haven't. And yeah, that will be it for today's video, guys. I really hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, go ahead and leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the videos that I upload. I want to know your opinion. What do you think about my rating of this albums? Do you think you have a different opinion? Then go ahead, leave it down below in the comments along with your reasons. We're talking about one of the greatest bands of all time here, so definitely you're gonna have a different opinion, a different take on every one of the albums. So go ahead, leave it down below. I'll be glad to check it out. With that being said, guys, once again, I hope that you enjoyed it, and I hope I can see you soon, guys, with another video. But until then, bye.